In today's murder case, we're going to delve into the real story of a notorious serial killer, David Fuller. Our story takes place in 1987 in the small town of Tunbridge Wells, located 30 miles southeast of England. At the time, a 25-year-old girl named Wendy lived there. 2 years earlier, she had just gone through an unhappy marriage. In 1985, she moved to the town, renting a single apartment, ready to start a new life. Wendy found a job at Super Snaps in town, and her hard work and enthusiasm quickly earned her the appreciation of her boss. She was soon promoted to manager. As her career flourished, so did her love life. Wendy's father worked for the local bus company. By chance, she met a young man named Ian, who worked for her father's company. They hit it off and quickly started dating. On June 21, 1987, Wendy and her boyfriend Ian were discussing their travel plans. Considering that June 23rd was Wendy's father's birthday, the couple planned to go on vacation to Paris after the birthday celebration and get engaged during the trip. However, what the couple didn't expect was that 25-year-old Wendy wouldn't make it to her father's birthday. On June 22nd, around 11 p.m., Ian took Wendy back to her apartment on his motorcycle. Since he needed to get up early for work the next day, he didn't stay over at Wendy's apartment as usual. The next morning, around 9 a.m., a female employee at Super Snaps called Wendy's mother's house to ask if Wendy had overslept. She explained that Wendy, as the manager, hadn't arrived on time to open the store, leaving everyone waiting outside. Wendy's mother immediately contacted her husband and Wendy's boyfriend, Ian. Hearing the news, Ian rushed back to the apartment. He knocked on the door for a long time with no answer. Finally, he went around to the back door of the apartment and saw Wendy lying in a pool of blood through the window. Ian climbed through a slightly open window and found his girlfriend lying naked on the bed, covered with a blanket and no longer breathing. When the police arrived at the scene, they found that Wendy had suffered a heavy blow to the head, had strangulation marks on her neck, and had been assaulted sexually. The apartment door lock wasn't broken, and there was no sign of forced entry. However, considering that one of the windows in the room couldn't be locked properly, the police believed the perpetrator might have entered through the window. Combined with the lack of evidence of a struggle at the crime scene, the police believed that the perpetrator might have been hiding in the room in advance and then suddenly attacked Wendy, leaving her no chance to fight back. Afterward, forensic investigators collected the perpetrator's bodily fluids from Wendy's body, fingerprints from her backpack, and a shoe print from her white pajama pants. After comparison, the shoe print didn't belong to Wendy or any of her relatives or friends, so it should have come from the perpetrator. The pattern of the shoe print was unique, and after careful analysis, forensic investigators believed that the print came from a pair of Clark's athletic shoes. However, the brand was very popular in the UK, and there were too many people wearing them, so the shoe print clue didn't help much. It's important to note that the case took place in the 1980s, when forensic technology was not well developed. Although the police had the perpetrator's fingerprints and bodily fluids, they didn't have a large enough database or DNA technology to find a matching suspect. Fortunately, the forensic investigators at the time preserved the evidence completely, laying the foundation for solving the case later on. Returning to Wendy's case, what alarmed the police was that her keys and diary had disappeared, suspected to have been taken by the perpetrator as souvenirs. Perpetrators who do this are very likely to strike again. As feared, 5 months later, the worst-case scenario that the police worried about did happen. 20-year-old Caroline was the manager of a local hamburger restaurant, Buster Brown's. On November 24th, around midnight, Caroline took a taxi back to her single apartment. Much like Wendy's case, the next morning, Caroline didn't show up at work on time. After the police were called, they searched Caroline's apartment and found it empty, with no signs of anyone having been there. Upon interviewing neighbors, the police learned that during the time of the incident, several neighbors had heard a woman's screams. However, when they looked out their windows, they saw nothing in the dark night. 3 weeks after Caroline went missing, a farmer called the police saying he had found Caroline's lifeless body in a ditch by the side of the road. When the police arrived, they found that Caroline's situation was similar to Wendy's. She had also been strangled after suffering a heavy blow to the head, and she had been assaulted sexually. Caroline's keys and her upper body clothing had also disappeared. Caroline's apartment was less than a mile away from Wendy's, and based on the crime scene, the police believed the perpetrator was familiar with the local neighborhood and might have seen both victims. At the time of the attack, the perpetrator must have hid in the shadows, waiting for Caroline to get out of the taxi, and suddenly struck before she could make it back to her apartment, forcibly abducting her. Considering the many similarities between the two cases, the police believed the perpetrator was the same person. Through interviews with neighbors, witnesses reported that several months before the incidents, there had been multiple cases of women being spied on in the nearby streets. A month before the crime, Caroline and her neighbors had discovered they were being watched. Concerned for her safety, Caroline had changed all her door locks just a few weeks before the incident. However, this still couldn't stop the crazed perpetrator. The two consecutive murders plunged the once peaceful town into panic. Newspaper headlines were filled with follow-up reports on the serial killings in single apartments. The police intensified patrols and warned people not to go home alone after parties. The police put in tremendous effort to solve the case, even flying to Australia and Canada to follow potential leads. They also made several appeals for public assistance on the BBC show Crime Watch, hoping to raise awareness of the case. However, as years passed, the investigation made no progress. In 2008, the police formed a cold case team to follow up on this case once again. In 2012, on the 25th anniversary of the case turning cold, the police announced their latest progress. Using the latest DNA technology, they had established a complete DNA profile of the perpetrator. However, after comparing it with the police database, no matches were found. In 2017, 5 years later, Wendy's father passed away from cancer, expressing his greatest regret was not being able to see his daughter's killer brought to justice. Fast forward to 2020, 33 years had passed since the crime occurred. In this year, the latest DNA technology brought new hope to the case. Police technicians using DNA matching technology discovered some part of a prisoner's DNA in their database that matched the DNA from the case. This indicated that although the prisoner was not the perpetrator, it was likely that a relative or family member was. After secretly tracking and analyzing 90 relatives, the police finally identified their suspect, who they had been searching for over 33 years. It's David Fuller. David Fuller was born in 1954, and he dropped out of school at the age of 16 to become an electrical apprentice. In 1972, David married his first wife, Jill Palmer, and they had 2 children, a boy and a girl. At the time, David and his wife lived on the same street as the first victim, Wendy. David's first marriage lasted 10 years, with 2 main reasons for the divorce. First, during this time, David was arrested several times for peeping and breaking and entering. Second, Jill grew tired of her thieving husband and had an affair with other men. Despite having a criminal record, after the divorce, David still managed to find a job as an electrician at Kent and Sussex Hospital. In 1983, David married again with his second wife, Sally, who was the girls' dormitory manager at Broomhill Elementary School. Since the school provided free staff accommodations, David and Sally moved into the school dormitory. To outsiders, David seemed like a quiet and kind person. He enjoyed sports, joined the local cycling club, and frequently participated in various cycling activities with his wife. Due to her role as a dormitory manager, Sally often worked at night, leaving David alone in the dormitory, which provided him ample time to commit crimes. Coincidentally, a few years later, Sally fell in love with another member of the cycling club, and their affair humiliated David the second time. After the divorce, David married his third wife, Mara, in the year 2000. They had a boy together after their marriage. Although to outsiders, David appeared to be just an ordinary electrician working at a hospital. But to the police, he was a man that could silence an innocent sheep. With the DNA evidence in hand, the police finally raided David's residence on December 3, 2020, at around 5 a.m. Although David denied any connection to the serial apartment crimes, a search of his residence led the police to find a photo of him wearing a pair of Clark's sports shoes, the sole pattern of which matched the ones found at the crime scene. In David's diary, the police discovered that he had visited the second victim, Caroline's workplace, the Buster Braun's restaurant, and the location where Caroline's body was later found was one of his cycling routes with the fitting club. The police collected David's DNA, and unsurprisingly, it matched perfectly with the DNA found at the crime scene. Thus, the police's 33-year-long pursuit of the killer came to a perfect end. However, the story was just beginning. Upon thoroughly searching David's residence, the police made a shocking discovery. After deploying 100 officers in a thorough search, they found tons of computer hard drives, floppy disks, SIM cards, DVDs, and printed photos. In total, the storage devices contained around 4 million videos and 14 million images, with a storage capacity of 23,000 GB. From this vast collection of videos and photos, the police uncovered an unbelievable fact. Between 2008 and David's arrest in 2020, David, who worked at the hospital as an electrician, had repeatedly entered the morgue and filmed himself violating numerous deceased women. Even more shocking, David meticulously documented the names of some of the victims in his notebook, later searching for their photos online, organizing and storing them on his computer. Over 100 victims have been identified, with the youngest being only 9 years old. The exposure of this case caused an uproar across the UK. Outraged citizens, especially the families of the victims, demanded answers from the hospital, questioning how an electrician could have committed such heinous acts for more than a decade without the hospital noticing. Under the public's pressure, the UK Health Secretary announced the formation of an independent investigation team to thoroughly probe the vulnerabilities within the healthcare system. Following a meticulous investigation, the police and the health department's investigative team determined David's modus operandi. The hospital used refrigerators to store the deceased. These refrigerators have a two-sided opening design, with the left side being the receiving area and the right side being the forensic examination area. Bodies are placed into the refrigerator from the left receiving area, and medical examiners can directly retrieve them from the right side for forensic examination. However, considering privacy concerns, only the left receiving area has 3 surveillance cameras, while the right forensic examination area has none. The forensic examination area connects to the staff room and storage room, and as a senior electrician at the hospital, David had an access card to enter the staff room and storage room. David had many legitimate reasons to enter these areas, such as checking circuits, monitoring refrigerator temperatures, and performing routine maintenance on electrical appliances. Therefore, even if someone happened to see him nearby, hospital staff didn't find it suspicious. Cunning David had already familiarized himself with the schedules of other staff members. While they worked from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., his own shift was from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. It was during these 3 hours between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. that he repeatedly committed his crimes. Between 2008 and 2020, David worked at 2 different hospitals. Access card records from both hospitals show that David swiped his card thousands of times. As a result, the police suspect that the actual number of victims, although David filmed over 100 of them, could be in the thousands. On November 5, 2021, 1 month before the trial, David finally admitted to his crimes. On December 15, 2021, the judge declared David guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and indecency, sentencing him to 2 life terms plus 12 years in prison. At 67 years old, David is unlikely to ever leave prison alive. The psycho serial killer's story ends here, his heinous acts making him seem less than human. If the police hadn't caught him in 2020, there's no telling how many more innocent people would have fallen victim to his cruel hands. In fact, as early as 2015, 5 years before his arrest, the hospital had required all employees to undergo criminal record checks, but for some reason, David managed to evade detection. Over 12 years, David swiped his access card thousands of times at both hospitals, entering staff rooms and storage areas, but this obviously unreasonable frequency failed to raise the hospital's suspicion. If the hospital had a more robust security system in place, perhaps David wouldn't have succeeded so easily.